So, having looked at why we plan, now we're going to look a little bit at how do we plan. Let's get into some details. In very simple terms, a plan is about understanding a position of where you currently are at, recognizing the vision of where you want to get to, but then recognizing that there are certain principles and boundaries that you don't want to cross when you're trying to come up with various strategies of how you get from your position to your vision. Okay, so let's look at, we'll take each one of those in a little bit more detail, shall we? First of all, position. To develop a good position statement, you can do this by carrying out a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. It could be that you do a PESTEL, where you evaluate the political, economic, social, technological, environmental and legal aspects. And it's about really just trying to understand where are we currently at, and if possible, putting some data on it. Because if you've got some hard facts of where you are in the present, then you can also measure, a measurable difference when you are heading towards your vision. You can see in numbers, are you succeeding? And so position is just knowing where you are currently at and documenting it. Sometimes we forget to really document it because we just can't see why that is terribly important. But actually, if we can document that position, then it gives us a really concrete thing that later we can come back to and say, well, how have we done in terms of achieving our vision? Have we actually moved from where we were to where we want to be? So developing position, it may be a SWOT analysis, maybe a bit of PESTEL analysis. But next is to think about our principles and boundaries. It may be that we want to think, well, are there some sort of international standards that we do not want to cross, or that we want to hold to? It could be that there are legal or national strategies that we say we are going to work within these confines. The point is always to find something that limits the actions which you can take. It may be that there are organizational things. There may be policies that are already written where you say, okay, we are not going to exceed the limits of this policy. Or maybe it's even just a practice. We have always done it within these particular boundaries, and that's what we're going to do this time. It may be that you determine there are certain moral restrictions where you say, we could get from position to vision in all sorts of different ways, but we choose not to cross any of these particular moral boundaries. It may be those moral restrictions are described in your values statement. But once you have articulated what are the boundaries, what are the principles that you're not going to cross, what are the things which you choose to limit yourself by, then it's a matter of thinking up a whole bunch of strategies. Not just one. Don't just go with your first idea, because often the first idea that you have of how you get from A to B, often it's not the best idea. Often we need to go through several different ideas. We need to develop multiple ideas that you can then select the best from. And of course, we know how to select the best now. We can use a cost-benefit analysis chart to work out which are the best of the ideas. So then we have to sort of decide, which ones are the best ones. As we said, cost-benefit analysis can help choose the best of those ideas. And it may be that some of the ideas we think, I think this is good, but we're not absolutely certain. Maybe we need to trial it, do a trial run, a pilot. if you like, where you try the strategy out just a little bit in a small way, or in a single location, or with a limited amount of resource, to test it out and see, does it really work? Does it do what we were hoping for? And of course, we can, once we've established which strategy or strategies we're going to use, we can then start trying to break that down into a bit more detail. So we've got our strategy, and we know that it is ending up at a particular goal. It is part of the vision. So usually you will have multiple strategies that are reaching multiple goals within the overall vision. And that strategy can then be broken up into a series of objectives. You can say, first we want to achieve this, then we're going to do that, then we're going to do that. And if we do those things, we will get towards the goal. Obviously, each objective may then be broken down into a series of actions. And you can see that essentially what we're doing is we're building up a hierarchy of plans, where for each goal there may be multiple objectives, and for each objective there may be multiple activities. Now, of course, you can write this in all sorts of different ways. It could be that we write it like this, in a classic sort of log frame: goals, then you write your objectives, and then you write all the details of the activities underneath. But you can break it up, and you can say goal with this objective and these activities, this objective and these activities, this objective and these activities. It's the same information. It's just can be laid out in different ways depending on which kind of audience you're trying to reach. If you are wanting to pull together a summary so that somebody who they don't want to read all the detail of the plans, you could just do this one with the goal and the top objectives, and just don't give them all the details of the activities. In which case, that is an easier way of summarizing the information. So it depends which audience you're trying to hit as to how you lay the information out, but the information is essentially the same. So then we have to go about trying to fit data into this. And I would encourage you, try thinking through a few different goals. And as you develop those goals, so you can then also be thinking, well, all right, what are the different strategies that I will use to get there? Don't just pick the first strategy that you think of. Try and think of multiple strategies, because as you come up with different strategies, you'll find that they have different strengths and weaknesses. And when you do the cost-benefit analysis, you'll figure out some strategies are actually clearly better than others. So try and choose the best strategies. Once you've got the best strategy or strategies in mind, then you can break that down into a series of objectives. And I would encourage you, when you're writing up your objectives, to write them in SMART terms: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound. To really sort of think through, are these well articulated so that somebody else who doesn't necessarily know about the project yet, that they can read this and make sense of it, because they might want to invest in it. They might want to join the project. They may be a beneficiary who wants to know, is this really going to be helping my community? And so these things need to be written in very clear terms that somebody else can pick up and go with. Having written the objectives, you can then start filling out the details of the activities. And here you're getting very practical as to what needs to happen in order to fulfill those objectives. And here, once you've made your plan, here's a couple of little tricks you can use for checking the integrity of your plan, because you can ask how in one direction. So you can say, here's a goal. How am I going to achieve it? By achieving these objectives. How will I achieve this objective? By achieving these activities. And each time you can ask how, going down to a lower level of detail, how? And does it really answer the question how? Or is that's not really clear. Similarly, you can work from the bottom upwards and say, why am I doing these things? In order to achieve this. Why am I doing these things? in order to achieve this. And so once you've written up your plans, I'd encourage you to go through at every level, follow the how chain down and follow the why chain up to test out, does it really cover all the things that you were hoping that this plan was going to cover? And of course, a plan is just a plan. There is still a whole bunch of stuff that happens that you can't guarantee, that you don't really know. You know, you're hoping that if you do these things, this will be achieved, but you're never completely sure. And that's where we need to also be thinking a bit about risks and assumptions. Often people will like to skip this phase because they don't really understand the value that it brings. But it is a very valuable stage. You know, if you want to fulfill this plan, let's say you have an objective here, and under it you have a couple of different activities. But it's good to note that this activity, it has certain risks and assumptions associated with it. And it will only be successful if these assumptions hold true. And these activities will only actually achieve this objective if certain assumptions hold true. Which is what is shown here, that these activities that happen, they're only going to work if this assumption holds true, then this objective will be met. And these objectives, if you meet all of these objectives, you have to also meet these assumptions and take into account these potential risks in order for the goal to be achieved. Maybe this isn't the clearest way of showing it. Let's show it in a different way. Put it this way around. So we've got goals, objectives, and activities. And here you can write, you know, against these activities where there are certain risks and assumptions that go along with it. And that these, you know, these risks and assumptions over here, they must all be fulfilled as well as the activities in order for this objective to be met. These risks and assumptions and these activities, only when they're all done, is this objective going to be met. And these activities must also have these assumptions fulfilled in order for this objective to be met. Then you can look at the objective level and say that these objectives and their associated risks and assumptions, only if all of those things happen, will this goal be achieved. And so it's quite useful to think in those terms. You think, well, what difference does it really make if those things happen or don't happen? But you can see as a planner, you can say, hang on a minute, are we taking reasonable risks? You know, are we saying that this action, if it is done and this and this assumptions are met, it's going to be successful? Great. But are those assumptions realistic? If you say, yeah, it's probably going to work out like that, great. You have a solid plan. And then if something doesn't happen, you can go back to it and say, do you know, we thought that was a possibility and it is what happened. But if you say, we're going to do this, this and this, we're assuming that this and this is also true, but that is a high chance that it doesn't happen, then that should ring an alarm bell and say, actually, I need to replan this bit of the project because that is too great a risk to take. So, you know, risks and assumptions, don't skip it just because it's difficult to get your head around. The next area then is about indicators and targets. Why do we need indicators and targets? Well, they give us something to steer by. You know, when you are sailing out at sea, sometimes you cannot see land. You have no idea where you are unless you have some objective things that you can check by. You know, when you are sailing along, let's assume you don't have GPS. When you're sailing along and you don't know where you are, you do know how long you have been traveling. You know the direction you've been traveling in. Maybe you've got a compass. Maybe you know the speed at which you've been traveling because you can put a thing in the water and you can measure how fast you're going through the water. there's all sorts of things that you can do that will give you some clues as to where you've come, how far you have gone, how fast you have gone, the direction in which you have gone, and so forth. But every once in a while, it is still very nice when you come across one of these things, a buoy. It floats in the water, it's got a long chain to the bottom, and it doesn't move. And so you can then look on a chart and you can say, aha, this is where we are. We've estimated all kinds of things of where we thought we were, but now we know for sure where we are. It is an indicator, a solid marker that can tell, have you achieved what you thought you were achieving? Now, in fact, in planning terms, there's always three different kinds of indicator. There are quality indicators, quantity indicators, and cost indicators. And when we combine these, that can give us a great picture of what is going on. If we look at both quality and quantity, we know how effective a piece of work is. When we look at quantity and cost, we can see how efficient something is. And when we look at cost and quality, we can see if we're getting value for money. So these three different kinds of indicators are very valuable in helping us to know how we're doing on our project. Let's take them one at a time in a bit more detail. Let's look at quantity first. Usually this is a question of how many things have we done? How often have we done them? How many people came? It's actually often a very easy to measure thing. But on its own, the details, this kind of data is useless. We did 6. Okay. Is 6 good or is it bad? No idea. So, numbers, they need some sort of a context. So one of the things that you can build context around is about comparisons. You can say input and output. Well, we prepared 6 workshops and we ran 5 of them. Okay. That sounds okay. Now I've got some idea what 5 really looks like. If somebody just says, we ran 5 workshops. Well, okay. But you prepared 6 and you ran 5. Okay, not bad. It could be input and output. It could be to do with income and expenditure, maybe, although that's heading more towards a cost type of indicator. But you can look at in and out. You can also look at past and present. And you can say, well, last year we did 365 of these operations. This year we've done 216. And that now gives you some context. Or it may be that you can say, well, we planned 43 of these workshops, and in fact, we've done 42 of them. Oh, that's pretty close to what we planned. Yeah. But there needs to be some sort of comparison. It's not just a number on its own is not good enough. There needs to be a comparison. So that's about quantity. How about quality indicators? Well, quality indicators are all about how well something was done, how good it was. Did it hit a particular standard? And of course, that's raising the question, well, who decides which standards you're using? Are we talking about some sort of external standard? Is this something that the government has set? Is this some sort of international standard? Or maybe it's an internal standard, something that is a target that we have set ourselves. Or maybe it's a standard that we have agreed amongst our technical staff. Or maybe it's something that the auditor has required of us. But there are those internal standards. Or it could be it's a standard that comes from our beneficiaries, from our customers, the people who we are working for. If they want something to a particular standard, have we met that standard? Or it may be that it's not our beneficiaries. Maybe it's stakeholders. Maybe it's even our investors, the people who pay for our work. Sometimes they might have standards that they require us to meet. And then, of course, there's the third lot of indicators, the cost indicators, which is obviously something about how expensive something is. And again, it's a number. The data on its own is not very useful. This project cost 2.6 lakh. And is that good or bad? Again, try comparing it with last year. Try comparing it against what was expected. So yeah, indicators, they have to be handled carefully. Otherwise, they can give a rather deceptive picture of what's going on. So first of all, do check. Is the indicator actually measuring the thing that you were hoping to observe? Because sometimes indicators can actually be affected by other factors than we ever intended. Is the indicator a maximum or a minimum? Target 6. Well, does the target mean no more than 6? And in which case 4, 5 and 6 are all good and 7 is bad? Or is it at least 6 should be done? In which case 4, 5 and 6 are not so good. Actually 7 and 8 would be good. So, is it a minimum or a maximum target indicator? 6 what? 6 people? 6 operations? 6 workshops? 6 meters? 6 kilograms? What is the unit of measurement? And how are you going to collect this? MOV is the means of verification. How are you going to collect this data? Because if you're going to collect some data, sometimes that actually requires another action happening that maybe you didn't plan. Somebody has to collect and collate that data and check it. So it may require another activity being added to your list of planned activities. And then, of course, we've got how we lay the information out. As we said, we could lay it out as a log frame or spread it out in a different way. But actually, the same information is there. And if you do this in something like a spreadsheet, it's possible you can sort in a particular way, and you can have both formats coming out of the same amount of data. But something which I think is very useful by using spreadsheet is that you can also then use this plan. You can then spread it out and say, well, here's the plan by time, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3 and quarter 4, and we can actually say who is going to do what, how much resource is going to be spent on this. So there could be costs attached to here, or it could be number of people involved, or which staff members are going to be carrying out this work. But basically you can tie the resource allocation into the same plan that you have been building up thus far, which means you're not trying to recreate, because sometimes people will write a plan and then they write a budget and there's a huge disconnect between the two. But in fact, they should be tightly bound together. When thinking about resource allocation, a couple of little tips that I would like to give. One is, don't have too much. Sometimes we think we need to have as much resource as is possible to ensure that we get the best result. But I don't think it's always true. Sometimes it's good to run on a minimum budget, and then we can give God the glory for what he has done as well as what we have done. Don't worry about having too little. If your vision has been inspired by God, he's going to make sure that you are resourced. If your vision has been inspired by the community, they will be a part of making sure that it happens. Don't worry. Sometimes we have to work hard to make it happen, but it shouldn't be something that we worry about if the vision is properly inspired and the plan is made well. But do use what you have wisely. Do you know the story of the man who had a magic goose that produced golden eggs? He was so pleased because it kept on producing these golden eggs. But of course, one day he got greedy and he said, I don't just want one or two. I don't just want one egg a day. It's making me I'm going to open up this magic goose and get all of the eggs out that I can. But of course, it doesn't work like that. And he killed the golden goose. And sometimes I think that we are at risk of doing that with our staff. We have to plan to use our staff and use our resources wisely, both so that we produce maximum output in the present, but also in the future. Are we building our staff up? Are we encouraging them? Are we helping them to grow? And then, fourthly, I would say use everything as if it actually belonged to God. Because, do you know what? Actually, it does. We have to use our resources knowing that we are going to be held accountable for how they are used and the results that we are able to get from those resources. So use those resources really carefully and really wisely, because we will be held accountable. There's also no such thing as a neutral planning process. I don't know, you've seen a bit of log frames, you've seen there's outcome mapping, there's all sorts of different ways of planning, but there's never such a thing as a completely neutral process. Every process that we engage in has some sort of philosophical foundation behind it. And so I would like to suggest a few philosophical foundations that you make sure are in whatever planning process you use. I would suggest that you need to be listening to the community's needs. If you're trying to do something to benefit a particular community, you have to be listening to what they say rather than you wisely deciding for them what they need. We need to be, secondly, empowering the community, maybe encouraging them to be a part of the planning process, maybe allowing them to hold us accountable for how it all goes. Thirdly, I think there needs to be strong logic in why we do what we do. There has to be a solid vision that really makes sense to all of those who are involved. Fourthly, we need to encourage transparency so that managers and donors are able to hold us accountable. Fifthly, I think we need to consider different activities because sometimes they have impacts way beyond the immediate. And we have to be thinking not just for the present and the golden eggs that we currently have, but also for the goose and the future. Are we building a transformative environment where other good things are going to come in the future? And lastly, do we learn from how things go so that we can do better next time? I hope so. Any planning process should have a process of evaluation built into it so that next time we do even better. And when we are sure that we have got our plans sound, we've checked them out, we've got the indicators, we've done the risks and assumptions, we've got the hierarchy in there, we've checked it with all these different parties, eventually we come to some sort of approval process. Now, we're all very familiar with the idea that plans have to be approved by the authority that has delegated them. So, in other words, a big high-level strategic plan probably needs to be approved by the board, whereas a weekly plan of what I do probably only has to be approved by my line manager. But it's always approved by one level higher than it is implemented and developed. If we recognize that our plans originate with God, then we also need to seek his approval, as well as, me seeking my line manager, seeking my team's approval, showing how the department fits in with the overall strategic plans of the organization. But how does the organization seek approval for the overall vision and plans that it has? I think it is right that organizations should seek the approval of God before carrying out plans. And sometimes we just say, "Dear Lord, this is our plan, please bless us as we move forward." I don't think that's good enough. When we go to seek approval of a boss or of a board, we always give them the chance to feed into it and to say, "No, I don't like this plan." And I think that when we're praying about our plans and committing our ways to God, I think we should be willing to hear from him So maybe he wants it done a bit differently. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on how the planning process goes, right the way through to seeking approval at the end of the process. I hope you have fun building some plans of your own.